The soul of a ninja is forged in steel and skill. Nothing but the best will do. Perfection is mandatory, or else death is inevitable. This is the ethos drilled into the soul of Cyber Shadow, the latest game published by Yacht Club Games and developed by Mechanical Head Studios. With this retro-inspired title, Yacht Club Studios aims to prove that they aren't just cyberpunks, but a full-on independent publishing powerhouse. Cyber Shadow is meticulously calculated to push players beyond their limits, with design so intentional that nothing happens by accident. But with this grand design comes a flaw. An achievements list so sadistic that it feels like it was designed by the devil himself.
Hey everyone, and welcome back to another brand new episode of The Completionist. We don't just beat the games, we complete them. Now, sometimes the first part of the year is devoid of solid new releases, but not this year. I've been honing my skills in the game that I've been anticipating for years. Strap yourselves in, everyone, because I've just completed Cyber Shadow.
Here comes a new challenger!
Yes!
Danger!
Cyber Shadow didn't come from nowhere. The game was designed over years by one man, Arne Mekacity. What started as a drawing of a ninja in a tank eventually caught the eye of Yacht Club Games, the developers of Shovel Knight and its many expansions. What follows is the story of collaboration, of passion begetting passion. Yacht Club struck gold with the development and release of Shovel Knight and its subsequent DLC packs. They were the indie developer that could, but Yacht Club also branched into publishing with Azure Striker Gunvolt on the 3DS a few years ago. This Mega Man X-inspired game deserved the spotlight, and working with Inti Creates helped bring the Japanese game to the West. Yacht Club is helping to publish games they believe in, and Mechaskull's side-scrolling action platformer Cyber Shadow is keeping that trajectory going. Now, most of you guys know by now, but Yacht Club Games is a studio that I have a deep personal connection to. Shovel Knight not only fundamentally changed the entire indie space, but impacted my life deeply. Yacht Club is a success story that would make anyone proud. And now on the publishing side, they're aiming to share their success. With Cyber Shadow, Yacht Club has proven beyond a shadow of a doubt that they are a force in independent publishing. From the opening seconds, it's clear that Cyber Shadow would appeal to a certain type of gamer. The Mechanical Head logo is a gorgeous 8-bit monolith, and the opening cinematic is like a time portal to a neon-drenched past. A cybernetic ninja is awakened to a devastated city. The ruins are full of rampaging robots, and the ninja's clan is missing or dead. The ninja, known as Shadow, must rescue his master and stop the destruction before it's too late. Like a shuriken to the brain, Cyber Shadow's design philosophy is sharp and to the point. It's a retro-inspired, tough-as-nails hack-and-slash action platformer. It might look similar at first glance to The Messenger, another ninja-starring game from a few years back that I loved. But Cyber Shadow is a vastly different game, both in style and in content. Rather than going full Metroidvania, Cyber Shadow is more focused on action. The action is twitchy and difficult. A true modern Ninja Gaiden, something I've been looking forward to after playing various demos of this game over the last few years. Players jump and slash their way through linear enemy-infested levels. There are health and magic upgrades to find, and various skills to learn, like a dash, wall jump, and throwing stars. There are mini-bosses and main bosses to battle, and the story slowly unfolds by finding computer terminals and encountering fallen members of Shadow's ninja clan. Eventually, players can fully explore previously completed levels with the traversal skills they've earned. It's a seemingly compact package until players explore beyond the main campaign. Now, I expected a challenge, but Cyber Shadow also folds in feats, basically a Yacht Club signature at this point. Even a cursory look reveals that the feats in Cyber Shadow will require me to be as focused and calm as an actual Buddhist monk to complete this game. Now, when I complete games, I always try to do so efficiently. That means hitting as many feats in my first playthrough as possible. But in Cyber Shadow, this isn't as easy as it seems. Many feats are tied to specific stages and bosses, and there is no easy way to repeat a stage or replay a boss fight to earn a specific feat. And that's not even accounting for the two scariest feats. A playthrough that would require me to beat the game without collecting a single health or magic upgrade, and another playthrough where I would beat the entire game in under 3 hours. It's more than enough to make me feel excited, but queasy. Yacht Club is obviously a brilliant publisher. By throwing their weight behind this game, they've expanded their niche. They aren't simply the studio that publishes love letters to classics from the past. They're the studio that helps shape the most nerve-fraying, electrifying, challenging retro experiences on the market. Because Mekaskull is clearly a skilled developer. Even as I nearly crushed my controllers with frustration as I made my way through this game and its feats, I marveled at the delightfully detailed design that is the heart of Cyber Shadow. In Cyber Shadow, it's clear that the developer wanted to evoke memories of the era when beating a hard game was an accomplishment all on its own. Cyber Shadow is more than just challenging. Each section of the varied levels is its own gauntlet. Everything in Cyber Shadow feels ultra-calculated down to the pixel. The creator's hand is felt throughout. Each aspect of gameplay was designed to challenge the player in a satisfying way, showing that someone must have done this on purpose. Perfectly calibrated, Cyber Shadow's challenges are proof that someone is in charge up there. One of the first things that players will notice as they slash and dash their way across the ruined Mekacity is that the levels are surprisingly long. Checkpoints are few and far between, something that becomes more painfully clear with every death. Now, checkpoints are obviously incredibly valuable as respawn points, but they also provide a useful service: the ability to spawn special items. Now, not every checkpoint gives access to these tools, but some let me spend my earned currency on items like the charge gun or the swag blade to appear at that specific location in the level. These aren't weapons I can summon at will any other time. Generally, they disappear forever after 3 hits, almost certainly by the time I reached another checkpoint. It felt like each weapon or tool was exactly the one I needed to make it past a given section. This is perfectly illustrated by the barrier tool in the sewers. There are acid drops falling all over the place, flies that zoom in from off screen, but this little tool gives Shadow a tiny protective shield. It's the perfect solution for this area, but it doesn't solve all of Shadow's problems. I still had to apply skill to keep the tool active, since I would lose it if I took too many hits. This tool isn't as useful in other areas, but right here, it was exactly what I needed. Nearly every gorgeous pixel art asset in Cyber Shadow can kill you. Spikes are instant death like a Mega Man game. Shadow can only take a handful of attacks before succumbing to the damage. There are no permanent defense upgrades. Shadow can increase his amount of hit points, but not upgrade his armor. Many enemies can knock off more than 1 hit point at a time, meaning Shadow is even more vulnerable. He is fast and agile, but hardly durable. The amount of times I died just a screen away from a checkpoint felt maddening initially. There are parts of this game where I was absolutely sure I'd reach a checkpoint, only to feel a pit in my stomach when I realized there was more to overcome, and there always is more to overcome in Cyber Shadow. The game layers in more and more challenges at every turn, to a degree that seems insane. Being sent back to a far-off checkpoint because Shadow's toe touched a spike was discouraging. Performing a perfect sequence of dodges, jumps, and dashes just to get clobbered by a random security drone off screen is like getting every answer right on a test except one and still failing that test. Cyber Shadow demands perfection in a way that I wasn't expecting, but that I eventually came to appreciate. I started to think about what Cyber Shadow would be like without things the way they are. Even though I found some areas tough, it was exactly the right amount of difficulty. If enemies took even 1 less slash to kill, the early game would be too easy. If there were more checkpoints between the checkpoints that already existed, making it further wouldn't be nearly as dramatic. If Shadow was a little more spongy and could take a bit more damage, I would never have had to learn to play like a ninja master that I would eventually become. Cyber Shadow intentionally calls to mind the toughest of retro platformers. Often, I felt like I had to learn the exact enemy placement and behavior in small chunks before I could progress. But there's one huge difference that Cyber Shadow makes, a modern concession that I am grateful for. There's no life system. Shadow has infinite lives, which helps make the trek from each checkpoint feel much more bearable. In a retro-style game like this, it's easy to imagine a life system. Instead, the lack of lives and move to checkpointing is evidence of grandeur design. Cyber Shadow is old-school masochism at its finest. A divine creator has built a perfect sandbox of sadistic toys, and it became my job to make my way perfectly through each area that was more difficult than the last. Every new enemy and boss had the potential to synthesize lessons learned up to that point. I made the most of every shuriken, every weapon or health piece hidden in a wall, and more importantly, every death. By the time I reached the last few chapters of this game, I really felt at one with the machine. I had mentally prepared myself for 3 playthroughs of Cyber Shadow. The first, to earn as many achievements as possible and learn the structure of the game. The next, to use those skills to finish the game without picking up any health upgrades or magic upgrades. And finally, the speedrun, where I would finish the game in under 3 hours. The meticulousness and thoughtful design really helped me find the flow for these final 2 challenges, something that I did not expect for my first few hours of Cyber Shadow. Now, my first run of this game took me 14.5 hours because I was going after as many feats as possible. The next, where I went through the game without any upgrades, it took me 9.5. So I was very nervous going into the speedrun playthrough. But because I had internalized all the enemy placement and boss patterns, I knocked out this achievement in 2 hours and 26 minutes. This achievement that I had been stressing over that seemed daunting and even unfair, I was able to complete with 45 minutes left over. I was more than ready because by the time I had prepared to chase this feat, somebody behind the scenes knew exactly what would happen. That said, getting to that point was absolute brutality, because in my journey to complete Cyber Shadow, I was nearly broken by many of the feats in the game. The game prepared me for the speedrun over the course of my playtime, but that turned out to be the exception rather than the rule. I was wholly unprepared for the whiplash of attempting many of these achievements. What seemed like a fun list of challenges in this incredibly well-designed game became a heartbreaking gauntlet of pain. Every part of Cyber Shadow feels intentionally designed, whether it's to make players aware of how to use their throwing stars or how to dash through enemies without touching the ground. Most challenges teach the players something they can use later. However, Cyber Shadow's feats either feel designed to frustrate completionists or like they weren't designed at all. Those of you who know me know full well that I don't mind getting down in the depths of some hard challenges. For the most part, Cyber Shadow feels tough but fair. Level layout and enemy placement are the majority hurdles to overcome in 2D action platformers like this, and Cyber Shadow absolutely nails those. But some feats force me to play in counterintuitive ways that seemed to undercut the lessons being taught to me throughout the levels. Now, I fully acknowledge that most people who are playing this game won't attempt to go full completion. Main campaign is challenging enough for players to feel like they've overcome something by the time they make it to the very end. But this show isn't the I casually beat the game guy, it's the Completionist. And some of these feats had me tapping at death's door. Now, as I said earlier, my first run of this game took over 14 hours, but not because of hard platforming sections or seeking out a hidden health upgrade. It's because I was trying to satisfy feat conditions. The only way to replay levels and boss fights is to literally start the game completely over. So I aim to take care of all of the feats along the way from the jump. Now this backfired on me hard. Take an early feat that required me to reach one of the first bosses without killing any enemies. It seemed easy enough, but at a certain point I encountered an enemy blocking a door I needed to go through. I figured I'd be able to just smash headlong into the enemy, take the hit, run to the next challenge and be good. But instead, I spent probably 45 minutes just trying to make it past this one enemy because there are barely any iframes after taking damage, meaning that this one small hit, something seemingly inconsequential, had me agonizing how to get through it. I started to wonder how much this feat had been thought out. Is this what Mekaskull intended? That players spend nearly an hour trying to get past an otherwise easy enemy? Or do they just not care? Or was I overthinking things because I just came back when I had more health and that feat actually worked? Many feats are tied to mini-boss or boss battles. There's one of many feats that are very frustrating here. For example, let's take the tank boss. There's a tank covered in cannons that shows up pretty early on in the game. Beating the tank isn't that hard, but the feat attached to the boss fight forced me to play this game very differently. The feat asks you to defeat the tank without destroying any of its attached pop-up cannons. Normally, this boss fight is a bit of a joke, but the boss has a turret that's right in the center of its main hitbox, and there's tons of projectiles flying at me from every angle, and even more so as the fight progresses. And because it's an early game feat, I didn't even have a fraction of my mobility options available, so I simply had to get good and dodge everything coming at me, and that feat alone took me almost an hour. Another early feat that really grinded my gears was the battle against the Biohunter, which is one of my favorite boss fights in the game, ironically enough. The feat requires you to fight the Biohunter only using your base sword, so that means no shurikens, no weapons like the gun or swag blade. However, the checkpoint right outside the boss offers you the ability to upgrade the checkpoint to give you the swag blade. If you upgrade this, no matter what happens, you just have the swag blade on you, which means that if you want to fight the boss, you have to 1. Create your own dodge game where you cannot hit the boss with the swag blade, but figure out how to get in close enough to hit him with your regular blade. 2, you have to take 3 hits of damage to lose the swag blade, but then you're down a bit of HP, and in doing so, you risk the chance of even hitting the Biohunter itself with the swag blade that you have. Or option 3, which is what I ended up doing, start over, or just save it for one of your other playthroughs, and just make sure that you do not upgrade the swag blade at that checkpoint no matter what. Again, normally, this is not a big deal, but it's not like I could go back and just do the fight again without restarting the entire game. Up to this point, the game teaches you to use checkpoints accordingly. You find a checkpoint, you probably should upgrade it. You're gonna get full health and possibly an item, possibly restore your SP. These are all things the game has taught me up to this point. So when you approach this checkpoint, your first nature is to upgrade the checkpoint, not realizing that the next room is the boss fight. So if feats are designed to challenge you or teach you a lesson you may have learned, then I definitely feel stupid and tricked in this situation. The main game feels like Goldilocks' porridge. It's just right. But this feat and others felt vulnerable to conditions outside of my control. And the sad thing is, for this specific feat, all you had to do was give me the option to turn off the swag blade in the checkpoint options. A simple on-off switch, if you will. Now, I hate to make a comparison, but in Shovel Knight, feats were designed to make you think about mechanics in a certain way, or in a new way that I hadn't thought about. Not so in Cyber Shadow. The feats are brutal, smack-you-in-the-face challenges that you either get on board with or don't attempt at all. Let's take one more example, and possibly the worst feat in the game. Let's take the Mecha Dragon, the Chapter 4 boss. Great boss design, interesting concept. But through the level leading up to the boss, it felt like the lesson the game was teaching me was about wall jumping. This boss and the feat associated with defeating it doesn't involve that even remotely. Instead, I had to defeat the boss without touching the water even once, and that was an exercise in frustration and RNG. It was something that I could barely control. So when I would inevitably fail the challenge, it didn't feel like something I could learn from. Oftentimes, it wasn't the feats themselves I had the issue with, but with trying to achieve them efficiently. Because there's no easy way to go back to a checkpoint or chapter, it felt like I was being discouraged from feat chasing. Cyber Shadow is impeccably designed. It's undeniable. But any frustration I had always and only came back to the feats. Weirdly, the first few chapters took me the bulk of my playtime, but chapters 6 through 10, I was able to complete in basically one sitting. Maybe the feats were less grueling, or maybe I just finally bent to the will of designer Mekaskull. Either way, it was a rough ride for the bulk of the achievements. This was all made the more heartbreaking because it felt like I was fighting so hard and there wasn't a lot of light at the end of the tunnel. Cyber Shadow is designed from the bottom up as an homage to tough NES games. Perhaps in a nod to that design philosophy, there's nothing to be earned from completing every feat in the game. For as difficult as these feats are, for as much as I put myself through the ringer and contorted my playstyle to achieve them, the rewards are as non-existent as Shadow's human body. There are no unlockables in this game. I'm not sure what I expected. Maybe a new game plus where I could rip through the game with everything unlocked, or some concept art or a sound test or something, but there's nothing. Just the sense of accomplishment for overcoming one of the most punishing set of achievements I've ever seen in a game. It's always a pleasure to play something with a singular vision behind it. There's so much passion and love poured into every pixel. I came away from Cyber Shadow with mixed feelings. The highs are high. I definitely felt like a badass during my speedrun playthrough, and defeating bosses on my no upgrade run felt fantastic. But a lot of these feats had me tearing my hair out and questioning whether the player had been considered at all. I feel exhausted, but ultimately excited to see what Mekaskull comes up with next. When I completed Cyber Shadow, there were 7 special abilities learned, from wall jumping to dashing to shuriken throwing. 10 chapters cleared 3 times by defeating all of the bosses. 41 trophies and feats earned, some found by simple progression and others by smashing my head into the wall for hours at a time. 3 full playthroughs. 1 for all of the feats, 1 without upgrades, and 1 for a speedrun. 1,206 deaths overall. 26 hours of total playtime. And 1 very good Super Mario Bros. Reference for players who are patient explorers.
Cyber Shadow is clearly a passion project, and I'm so incredibly glad it's seen the light of day. Yacht Club Games clearly loved this game so much that they wanted to help see it to come to fruition, and more retro-style action platformers are always a good thing. The design is clean, the combat is tight, and the music is phenomenal throughout. But these feats are brutal. Maybe it was my approach, but I couldn't help but feel like I was being subtly punished for completing this game. Look, I love this game, but do not worry about putting yourself through hell to complete all of those feats. So, with that in mind, guys, I give this game my completionist rating of finish it.
Finish it!